On November 18, 1997, rookie Ashtabula patrolman William Glover Jr. was executed while in the line of duty. The evidence and testimony points to this sequence of events. Glover is on patrol. He drives by a house where a bunch of men are on the porch. He spots Audrey Jones, who has a warrant out for his arrest. He tells Jones to stay put while Glover gets out of the car. But Jones runs. Glover runs after. Yelling into his police radio he is in pursuit of Audrey Jones. Glover rounds the corner of the house, but that gives Jones time to shoot Glover. Glover sinks to the ground. Jones walks over, points the gun at Glover's head, and shoots him again, essentially executing the patrolman, although Glover would hang on a few more hours at a Cleveland hospital. Then Jones kicks the officer and takes off. Jones was found guilty, sentenced to death, had numerous appeals, and 17 years later remains on death row filing appeals. The newest wrinkle? A free Audrey Jones Facebook page. On the page, Jones says, quote, "Peace. I'm looking to make the acquaintance of some beautifully enlightened people. I've been on death row since June 9th, 1998. My appeals are looking good considering how terrible my case appeared in the beginning. These prosecutors do a hell of a job making a cat seem as guilty as charged. Anyway, I'm doing wonderfully in regard to state of being and state of mind. I keep positive and spend my time constructively by working on my appeals, studying and pursuing goals as far as strength goes. If you happen to be passionate about justice, write me." End quote. Well, Jones's state of mind may be fine, but William Glover's widow is in a far more fragile state. Mary Anna Waldman has since remarried another police officer and lives with him in Ontario. She has been fighting off and on to get rid of the free Audrey Jones page. We scheduled interviews to talk about the case, about her husband, about the murder. But when it came down to it, the interview process terrified her. So we will hear from Marianne Waldman, the former Mrs. Glover. We simply won't hear them from her lips. Our one upsetting aspect, her daughter never saw a photograph of the man who killed her father until she stumbled on this website. We don't have Marianne on camera, but we will go back and talk to the retired county prosecutor who handled the Jones case and says it was his most open and shut case. We will talk to an individual who joined the prosecutor's office at the time of the murder and is still there. We will talk to one of Glover's best friends. The two went to the police academy together. He will describe the hours in the hospital after Glover was mortally wounded. We will talk to the officer who arrested Audrey Jones and saw him ditch the gun linked by physical evidence to the crime. We will talk to an officer still on the force who was a buddy of Glover's. Learn what the Ohio Department of Corrections says about death row felons having Facebook fan sites and what exactly is Facebook's policy on all of this. Audrey Jones's grandmother will tell all of this was a kangaroo court just to convict her innocent grandson. And we will try to answer the question, after 17 years, will Audrey Jones ever be executed? First, we interview the county prosecutor at the time, Tom Sartini.
Well, Officer Glover was on patrol that day and down in the Station Avenue area, and he was patrolling that area, and he noticed Audrey Jones on the porch of a home off of Station Avenue with two other gentlemen. When he saw Audrey Jones, who he recognized, who he'd known from prior involvement with him, and knowing that there was a warrant out for his arrest for some felony, I can't remember exactly what it was. I would like to preface this also, but I haven't had a chance to review the file, but I'm doing this with memory of 17 years ago. He told Audrey Jones, Officer Glover said to Jones, "Stop, I want to talk to you." Audrey Jones, knowing that there was a warrant out for him, took off running. Officer Glover exited his vehicle and began chasing Audrey Jones. Jones ran around the house that they were standing in front of, and Glover chased him. As he began chasing him, Officer Glover called for help. They have a way of doing that with a microphone that's attached to their uniform. And he began calling for, not so much help, but indicating that he was in pursuit of Audrey Jones. Gave the location of about where he was, and began chasing him. As Officer Glover went around the same house that Audrey Jones was running from, based on eyewitness testimony that I'll talk about in a second, Audrey Jones turned and fired a shot at Officer Glover, and I can't remember where he hit him, but he put Officer Glover, hit him, and to the point where Officer Glover went to the ground. Audrey Jones then walked up to Officer Glover and fired a shot from point blank range into Officer Glover's head, basically executing him at that point. Jones then took off running, and he ran through some backyards in the area. There was a witness who noticed an African-American gentleman running through his backyard. And at this point, Asheville Police Department was responding to Officer Glover's call for the fact that he was in pursuit of Audrey Jones. Patrolman Rob Stell, who's now the chief of police at Asheville Police Department, was one of the officers who responded to this call, who also was on duty that day, patrolling somewhere in the city. And at some point, Officer Stell came upon Audrey Jones, who was trying to get into, shaking a door and banging on a door of some apartment building somewhere in that area, 3 or 4 blocks away from where the shooting occurred. And Officer Stell came upon Audrey Jones and, as I recall, pulled his gun and his duty weapon and told Audrey Jones to that he was under arrest. And again, I'm not sure that the Patrolman Stell at the time even knew that there had been a shooting. But what he did notice was that Audrey Jones dropped a gun behind a shrub that was where he was standing. He was standing on kind of a little porch trying to get into this place. He drops his pistol down, and so he's under arrest. He arrests him at that point. Other officers come to help Stell with the arrest.
So I drove around to West Avenue and proceeded to the Metro Estates. I figured, well, I mean, there's not a lot of different ways that Audrey could run if he's running from one of our officers. I thought I'd kind of head him off over by the Metro Estates, and that's where I kind of positioned myself. And before long, Audrey Jones ran out in front of my car, and ultimately I was able to apprehend him. And
Now the prosecutor said he was pounding on somebody's door.
he was, yeah, there's about the first apartment, as soon as you cut across the street going northbound, the first apartment building right there, he went to the very first door and tried to force his way in. It wasn't so much pounding on the door, he actually opened the door part way, but the people inside the apartment, they pushed it back shut. You could see the door going back and forth a little bit. He pushed it shut, and you know, right around, I'd say, right around the time I was exiting my car to go after him, I had said, I have him over here. I called that in the radio. Dispatch said something along the lines of, well, we got reports of shots fired. I could hear they were trying to call checkups on Officer Glover, and he wasn't responding his radio. And there was some mention over the radio that shots were fired and that they weren't able to reach him. So it was in my mind that, you know, the two may be related. I didn't know that at the time, but
So you did not know that for sure that there was a shooting or that it was Glover?
I wasn't sure that they were connected, but you know, when we have shots fired in the area while there's a foot pursuit going on and the officer's not being able to be reached on the radio, I was aware that may be what had happened, or that there may be some connection there when I exited my vehicle and then pursued him for just a short distance. He tried to enter the apartment there, and then I got up to him, and then I saw that he had something in his hand, And at this point, I had my weapon drawn. I told him to, basically to give up. And he threw an item down, which turned out to be the handgun that was recovered, that was determined to be the one that was used in the murder. And he did. He laid on the ground, spread eagle, and I held him there at gunpoint until then Sergeant Matson, who was our former chief of police, he arrived just a short time later, not probably less than a minute. He was there, and he actually came over and handcuffed Audrey Jones while he was on the ground.
It was from this window that a 12-year-old girl saw and later testified to Audrey Jones's shooting of Patrolman William Glover. She didn't want to talk to us. However, widow Marion Glover Waldman gave this account. She said her husband was shot 4 times. The first shot was in the back right shoulder as Glover ran past the garage that stood next to the house at the time. It has since been torn down and the fence erected. Glover stopped, turned around, and Jones advanced, shooting him again, grazing Glover's neck. Jones then pointed the gun at point-blank range. Glover attempted to grab the gun barrel, but Jones shot him in the face, the bullet entering below his right eye. Glover fell to the ground. Jones fired the 4th and final shot into Glover's head, then kicked and spit on him before running.
Audrey Jones had additional bullets for that gun in his pocket of his shirt. The gun that matched the bullets that were in the gun. It was the appropriate ammunition for that gun. The bullets that were in the gun also matched the bullets that were in Officer Glover's, that were recovered from Glover's body when the forensics were ultimately done. It was also determined that Audrey Jones had gunshot residue on his hands, indicating that he had recently fired a gun. And so you add all of that up, along with the fact that there was an eyewitness who was at a next door home, in the back of that home, on the 2nd floor, looking down. It was a young girl, I can't remember her name, but she was 12, 13, 14 years old or something like that, who ultimately testified that basically what I just said with regard to what happened in the backyard. She was an eyewitness. She was looking straight down on it. She indicated that Jones turned, fired at Glover, who had not even drawn his weapon because he was just chasing Jones to try to arrest him, not knowing that Jones was armed. So when the first shot put Glover down, and she also indicated that she then saw, and as one other thing I just remembered, Jones went up to Glover, shot him in the head, and kicked him. As I remember now, that she also said that that he kicked Officer Glover after he had shot him. So he put all of that together, along with the gun being recovered and all of the forensics evidence. It's a very, very strong case, and as I indicated, it's probably one of the strongest cases from an evidentiary standpoint that I ever had.
It was just after Audrey Jones was placed in the back of my police car, if memory serves. I heard Officer Koski, who's then now at the scene and located Officer Glover, was calling for an ambulance and telling them that they needed a life flight to come in and just to start sending it. And I heard that over the radio.
I talked with Dave DePofi, who became good friends with William Glover when they went to the police academy together. They talked about working together at some point. Eventually, Glover got a job with the Ashtabula Police Department. DePofi got a position with the Conneaut Police Department. DePofi has since resigned and operates Poco Bandito restaurant in Conneaut.
I was off duty, and I can remember walking into my mother's house, and she looked at me and she says, I don't know what's going on. She goes, but the police department's looking for you. So I got on the phone right away and I called.
This is Conneaut Police?
This is Conneaut. So I got on the phone and called, and they had told me that Bill had been shot. They said that Marianne was asking for me and that they were at ACMC. So I immediately went to ACMC, When I got there, they were loading Bill on the helicopter, and Mary Ann and I and Eric Gillespie, Connie Patrolman as well, who we all went to the academy with. We all got into a cruiser, and we all went to Cleveland at that time and met the helicopter there. Cleveland PD was absolutely fantastic. They never let us out of their sight. There were dozens of Cleveland PD guys there. Took care of Mary Ann's every need. It was out of the whole thing. I mean, it was quite impressive. We stayed until his parents could get there, and then the four of us, obviously at some point in time, there decisions had to be made, and then we stayed there until he passed. And after, it wasn't long, probably a few hours after they had removed some life support that he passed. He was assaulted one day and then he passed the next. So it was probably about 18 hours. No, it never goes away. You can almost feel November coming around. It's, there are very few events in my life that leave a mark, and that's one of them. And that was, for a 20-something guy to watch his best friend be murdered and be there when he died was a difficult thing to go through. And I was lucky that I had family, who was really supportive, and a department that was supportive. And it's been 17 years, and I was getting ready to come here, and it was like it was yesterday. To think about what had happened and what's going on now. As far as Facebook's concerned, it's just another outlet.
It reminds you he's still alive.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is that if his name were on a list, he wouldn't have a presence on Facebook. And I think that above all else is the most ridiculous part. I mean, the reason that anybody even knows that presence on Facebook exists is because at some point in time, it just popped up on somebody's, on somebody's page, and it was like, I can't believe this even exists. The terrible thing is that it can pop up on anybody's page. If it's the friend of a friend of a friend of a friend
Right.
who posts it, all of a sudden his children are staring at the man who killed him. And it's a ridiculous notion. It seems so simple to me that they should just take it down. I filed, obviously complaints with Facebook. Mary Ann has. Nobody has responded to mine, and they responded to hers and said that it doesn't seem like it violates the policies that they have, although it's obvious to me that it does.
So what is Facebook's policy on all of this? Well, like Dave DePofi, I didn't get a response. But Marion Waldman, Glover's widow, did. This is what she was told. This page wasn't removed. Quote, "Thank you for taking the time to report something that you feel may violate our community standards. Reports like yours are an important part of making Facebook a safe and welcoming environment. We reviewed the page you reported for containing credible threat of violence and found it doesn't violate our community standards. Note, if you have an issue with something on the page, be sure to report the context, example, a photo, not the entire page. That way, your report will be more accurately reviewed. We understand you still may not want to see this page. Here are a few things you can do." And then Facebook suggests you ask Free Audrey Jones to remove this page. Yes, Facebook is asking the widow of a slain police officer to ask the man who's on death row for his murder if he would please remove the Facebook page. The other alternative is they suggest you simply unlike the page so you won't see it. Now, what exactly does Facebook's community standard state? It says in the standards, quote, organizations with a record of terrorist or violent criminal activity are not allowed to maintain a presence on our site. And what about the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction? What does it say about all of this? Well, I talked via email with Ricky Safang from the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections. I asked him, would inmates, especially condemned ones, be permitted access to computers? He said, quote, death row offenders, computer access is limited to the JPay kiosk and legal law computer program. All computer access is monitored with no internet access. Now, JPAC is a kind of internet site where friends and family of inmates can send them money. I asked, can they set themselves up on social networking sites? He replied, offenders confined with the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction do not have access to established social networking sites. I said, is this more likely a friend has set this up on Jones's behalf? He said, I can't speak to the fact of who created the site. I asked if there's any way the state could get it taken down. He said no. I asked if the Ohio Department of Corrections gets into this situation at all. He said no. Finally, I asked, when is Jones's execution date? He replied, quote, the Ohio Supreme Court establishes the date of execution. At this time, our agency has not been provided inmate Jones's execution date.
You know, and the fact of the matter is, if he were a sex offender who had received 2 years in prison and had been out for 12 years and was a free person who was a member of society, a contributing member of society, I could contact Facebook, say his name is on this list, and they would immediately remove him from Facebook. But somehow, a murderer on death row has more rights than somebody on the sex offenders registry when he's committed the most heinous crime in our society. But people who have committed lesser crimes, what we would deem, at least in the court, as lesser crimes, are banned from that site simply because their name's on the list. So, you know, my question is, do we just need to send them a list? I mean, is that what this comes down to? Look, he's on the list, so take him off of Facebook.
So you may be wondering, what about Audrey Jones? Are there mitigating factors in his life? First off, I talked to Teresa Lyons, the grandmother of Audrey Jones, who raised him and considers him more of a son. She now lives in the Youngstown area, and she says she's not familiar with the Free Audrey Jones website, but she says she supports anything that will help free her grandson, whom she says is innocent. She said, quote, I've been fighting for my son since day one. My feelings haven't changed. I said he was innocent in 1997. I say he is innocent now, end quote. She said he is trying to get his life together. The photo, by the way, is of Lyons at an anti-death penalty rally in Youngstown. Lyons calls Jones's trial a kangaroo court. She said, quote, you had a young black man charged with killing a white police officer. A lot of things they didn't bring out, and he didn't get a fair trial, end quote. She said there were 3 other people who conspired against Jones. Lyons said one of them went to her home and said he committed the crime, but he could not do the time. She said, quote, there were no jurors of his peers. This was a white officer. There was so much hatred toward Audrey, end quote. She maintains the 12-year-old witness to the murder initially said a man in a tan jacket shot Officer Glover, but by the time she got to the stand, she changed it to a man in a green jacket, Audrey Jones. She said she was not able to hire the attorney she wanted. As for the attorney who defended Jones, she said the attorney didn't work for Audrey, he worked for the state. She said she wanted David Perdue to defend her grandson. If he had been the attorney, she said Audrey would have been found innocent. She also said the trial should not have been held in Ashtabula County because of the publicity. As for the Glover family, she said, they played their cards, the grieving widow, well, I'm the grieving grandmother, end quote. Some more information we gleaned about Jones from the 11th District Court of Appeals decision that affirmed the murder conviction and death penalty. But in the appeals records, it states that it was alleged that there was ineffective assistance of counsel in the context of a petition for post-conviction relief. Included, the performance of the defense counsel was seriously flawed and deficient, and the result of the appellant, that's Jones's trial, or legal proceedings would have been different if defense counsel provided proper representation. It also states that Jones's foster mother, Teresa Lyons, testified that Jones did not know who his father was until he was 13 years old. A mitigation cultural specialist testified that there was no male model in Jones's life and that the lack of a father had a devastating effect on Jones. This according to his aunt, Carlette Owen, who testified that Jones's mother, that she did not have time for him, that she spent her time in the streets drinking and doing drugs. And the aunt further testified that Jones did not cry when his mother died. Dr. James Eisenberg testified that as a baby, Jones's mother did not want to feed him, and that Jones frequently went to the hospital because it was the only place that people took care of him, and that he gave up when his mother died. Mitigating factors also, personality disorders, exposure to a culture of violence, head trauma, the loss of trust with others, and the effect of Jones's mother's death were all extensively supported by the evidence presented on behalf of the appellant Audrey Jones, the court record states. Jones was hit on the head at one point by his cousin. There was substantial testimony as to the nature and extent of Jones's injuries during the penalty phase, this the court ruled. Teresa Lyons testified that as a result of the assault, Jones was transported by helicopter to Metro General Health Medical Center. There, Dr. John Kenny, a neuropsychologist, testified that the head injury resulted in irritability and paranoia that lowered Jones's threshold for aggressive outbursts. However, Dr. Robert White, a neurosurgeon, operated on Jones at Metro Health Medical Center and said it was not a major operation. Dave DePofi, retired prosecutor Sartini, and others are just as convinced Jones is guilty and the punishment is just.
I wasn't there for the trial. As far as saying that, obviously every criminal who gets caught is going to say that their defense is botched. That's the nature of the beast. I don't know how you can say that it was botched multiple times, because if you look, Audrey has had multiple appeals, and those multiple appeals have been denied. So even if his original defense were botched, at what point in time, he's 2 appeals away from, fulfilling his sentence. There's obviously teams of lawyers who are attempting to get him a new trial or a reduced sentence who aren't. So, obviously, if it were obviously a botched defense, at some point in time, an appeals court would admit that.
In 17 years, I've had to handle an awful lot of cases, a lot of murder cases, and a lot of them were very strong evidence, but I don't think I ever had a cases where the evidence was as strong as it was in this case.
I'm absolutely certain that the facts of the case indicate, one, he was tried by a jury of his peers, and he was found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. There was an eyewitness to the crime, a civilian eyewitness, not related to law enforcement, who was at second floor window or opening from a home who watched him do it. There was an officer at the time who apprehended him, and all the evidence put together, the forensic evidence, the eyewitness evidence, the crime scene evidence, indicated that he was guilty of killing Officer Glover. There's no question in my mind that he's guilty.
So what kind of a guy was William Glover?
I mean, he was a great guy to work with. I mean, he was always there when you needed something. You can ask him to do anything and he would do it. There were times where when we were all hired on together, there was three of us, myself, him, and John Koski. We were all hired on around the same time. We were assigned to the Asheville metropolitan housing areas. He was real friendly with the children down there. They always, when he pulled up, they always came running to his car, and there were times where he would used to pass out candy. And prior to him working with the city, I worked with him out in the village of North Kingsville. He was there for a period of time before he left there to go to become the chief out of Roaming Shores. It was sad what happened, and I remember that day, and something I'll never forget.
Everybody liked the guy. He was just a very likable guy. I didn't work many years or anything. I didn't work with him for that long, just the time that he was with the department. But worked with him enough to know that he cared about the kids. That was always first in his mind. I saw him out there shooting baskets with him down at the Metro Estates basketball courts, and I would see him pass out candy to the kids. He always had candy in the car, and he's always just talking about the kids and stuff that he'd met down there. Always was really helpful, and he didn't hesitate to help other officers out if they needed assistance. He was always right there. Just genuinely a good guy, hard-working guy, and very thoughtful person. And that's what I remember about him, is he was just genuinely a good person.
William Glover's life and tragic death had a big impact on those who knew him. His buddy, Dave DePofi, for example, eventually quit law enforcement to open a Mexican restaurant in Conneaut.
If you're asking if Bill's death had anything to do with it, absolutely. Absolutely. Had that not happened, had he still been around, we obviously would have been continuing our friendship, and whatever, doubts that creep in or pursuits that you want to go after, they're always tempered by the people that you're around, the people that you're closest to. Mm-hmm. And he certainly would have been one of those people that I would have.
He may have talked you out of it.
He may have. He may have. His goal was, like most of ours, is to rule the world. And it was always, someday we'll be sheriff, or someday, I'll be chief, or someday, and that was always the goal for all of us, was to reach the top, and bring everyone else with them.
He ran right in front of my car with a gun in his hand that at this point was no longer loaded, because he had fired off all his shots. That easily could have been me had he had an opportunity to reload or still had more bullets in the gun. That did cross my mind. That I was lucky, because all he had to do was turn around, and I was sitting there in my police car. He could have easily shot me as well while I was sitting there. So it put a lot of things into perspective for me as a young officer. That's, no matter how many times people tell you, this is not a game out there. This is serious business. You don't always realize that.
Did you kind of change the way you did things after I think a little bit more?
It did. I took things a lot more seriously at that point in my career. As a very young guy, just they're chasing bad guys was fun, and then and then I realized at that point, it's like, what, this is no game. This isn't fun, and I used more caution from that point forward. I didn't necessarily go after people by myself so much if I could help it. If I knew somebody had a warrant, I waited for my backup to arrive as a result of this incident that took.
Glover's widow, Mary Ann Waldman, has been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, once called shell shock or battle fatigue syndrome. WebMD describes it as, quote, a serious condition that can develop after a person has experienced or witnessed a traumatic or terrifying event in which serious physical harm occurred or was threatened. PTSD is a lasting consequence of traumatic ordeals that cause intense fear, helplessness, or horror, such as a sexual or physical assault, the unexpected death of a loved one, an accident, war, or natural disaster. Families of victims can develop PTSD, as can emergency personnel and rescue workers. Here are her remembrances of the night Glover was shot, in her own words. I remember that night when we were at ACMC prior to Billy being life-flighted to Cleveland. I remember getting out of the police car and being met by Captain Pat D'Angelo. I remember him telling me Billy had been shot. In my mind, I knew that it would be okay, though, because Billy always wore his vest. I asked where he had been shot, and I was told. I think that is the moment I went into shock and just started functioning on stress mode and not allowing sincere comprehension of the matter. The first thing I did was ask whomever I talked to get Dave DePofi and Eric Gillespie contacted as soon as possible, as they were his best friends and I wanted them there with me. What seemed like seconds later, they were there. I remember seeing Billy and the nurse telling me to talk to him. He could hear me. I remember D'Angelo coming into the small room where we had assembled and telling me the doctor said it was a survivable injury, that he was being life-flighted to Cleveland, and that I would be taken by police car to Cleveland, 50 miles away. Blue lights and sirens, me, 2 Jefferson officers driving, Dave and Eric all in this car. The interstate had been blocked off and there wasn't a car on the road the entire way. Every now and then I would see an officer and an exit salute as we whizzed by with sirens blaring. We arrived in what felt like moments. The media frenzy gathered to catch a glimpse of me and trying to get the story. I had an amazing wall of officers from Cleveland, Ashtabula, Conneaut, and Jefferson surrounding me, trying to keep me hidden when I needed a cigarette. That happened only once, and then they wouldn't let me outside again. So here I was, smoking in the stairwell of a hospital. I'll never forget the neurosurgeon coming and telling me, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Glover, but your husband is going to die. We can't save him." I screamed at him, told him he was wrong, that the doctor in Ashtabula said it was a survivable injury. It was like a nightmare in slow motion. I called Billy's parents. I called my father. And even as I spoke the words, "he's going to die," I just couldn't grasp the reality. I tended to Billy, leaving his side only to smoke. I changed his bandages. I asked the nurses to help me cover up the horrible wounds so he would look better when his parents arrived from Virginia. Bag after bag of blood, bag after bag of platelets poured into his body, just trying to keep him alive. His face had swelled 3 times its normal size. I remember one eye slightly opening and a tear rolling down his face. I yelled for the nurse, "See, he can hear me. He is alive." Little did I know that it was the swelling causing it. I remember the conversation and decision to take him off life support. I knew I was going to, regardless what anyone wanted, because that was his wish. But I included his parents so they would think they had a say. He still lived for a few hours after we stopped all measures. Blood began to run fast from his wounds, pooling on the floor beneath the bed. His breath slowed, and I actually fell asleep listening to the sound of air being forced in and out of his lungs and his heart beating, and then Dave woke me. The time has come, and within a few minutes, Billy left this earth and my world was shattered. At another time, Marianne said, "Audrey took the life of Billy for one reason and one reason only, because he could. And when the time comes, I intend to be there to ensure I watch him executed, because I can." But will Glover's widow have that chance? After all of this time, will Audrey Jones be executed? It's a question I posed to Tom Sartini.
Essentially, all his appeals have been exhausted. He's filed some additional motion. He's starting to file a bunch of stuff on his own. And he's just throwing as much stuff against the wall as he possibly can. And and requesting records and all of this, just the delaying tactics and just playing games with the system is all he's doing. The clock is ticking. It's been almost 18 years. I don't know what the average time in Ohio is, but it's getting close. And so he's alive because the system allows him to be alive for this length of time. Unfortunately, I think that because he's had all his appeals, the case has been looked over by the state courts, the Ohio Supreme Court, federal district courts. I'm sure he's tried to get into the federal appeals court. Well, I'm certain he will be executed unless the Supreme Court abolishes the death penalty or something like that.
Which has happened.
Which has happened, and I think it would be very unfortunate because it's this kind of case, the worst of the worst case, that the death penalty is appropriate.
It's easy to look at a town like Conneaut, or even Ashtabula, Andover, Orwell, and say, oh, it's just a small town, or it's how bad could it be? There are things that every police officer in this county sees that they wouldn't wish on their worst enemy, and you carry that with you your whole life. And at some point in time, everybody has to sit down and realize, how much more do I want to go through? How much more do I want to see? Is it worth it to me? Is it worth it to my family? Because each one of our families, puts up with all of this as well. And everything that happens to us or everything that we do reflects on them. And everybody makes their individual choices.
It was sad what happened, and I remember that day, and something I'll never forget.